5 soldiers were killed in Borno not during a long battle, but by a suicide bomber who rammed into a military convoy. That detail matters. This attack did not happen in isolation. It happened in an area where the military has been carrying out weeks of clearance operations and claiming gains against insurgents. Yet despite these operations, a suicide bomber was still able to breach a military convoy, damage equipment, and kill trained soldiers. This raises a serious question. When suicide bombings return in this way, it is usually not a sign of strength. It is often a sign of desperation, a change in tactics, and a message being sent. The bigger issue here is not just the loss of lives, painful as that is. It is what this attack tells us about the current phase of the war in the Northeast. So the key question we need to examine is this. Why are suicide bombings resurfacing in Borno now, even as the military claims progress? Here's what has been confirmed from available reports. On Wednesday, a suicide car bomber rammed into a military convoy in the Timbuktu Triangle area of Borno State. The attack happened as troops were returning from a clearance operation in the area. At least 5 Nigerian soldiers were killed in the attack. An unspecified number of other soldiers were injured. Security sources confirmed that 2 senior officers, a major and a lieutenant, were among those affected. Military equipment, including armored and logistics vehicles, was also damaged or destroyed. According to the military, the convoy encountered 2 vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. One was successfully neutralized, but the second bomber breached the defensive position and detonated. The injured soldiers were evacuated by Nigerian Army aviation helicopters to medical facilities in Maiduguri. Air Force platforms provided cover during the evacuation and follow-up operations. The military later stated that troops continued their operations in the area and recorded further gains, including clearing insurgent locations and discovering mass graves believed to contain the bodies of killed terrorists. These are the confirmed facts of what happened. Any deeper meaning requires careful analysis. To understand this attack properly, we need to look at when it happened and what was happening around it. The suicide bombing occurred on Wednesday, as troops were returning from a clearance operation in the Timbuktu Triangle area of Borno State. This was not a random patrol. The soldiers had just concluded operations that reportedly dislodged several insurgent camps. According to the military, the convoy encountered 2 explosive-laden vehicles during this movement. One was stopped, but the second managed to breach the defensive position and detonate. After the attack, injured soldiers were evacuated by air to Maiduguri, while troops continued operations in the area. The military later released statements highlighting continued advances and discoveries of mass graves linked to insurgent casualties. What stands out in this timeline is the sequence. The attack came after weeks of military pressure on insurgent groups. It happened during a return movement, a moment when forces are often exposed, and it was followed quickly by official communication, stressing that operations were still ongoing. In security matters, timing often tells us more than statements. When attacks occur during moments of transition, they point to tactical adaptation by insurgent groups rather than coincidence. This timeline helps us understand why this incident may signal more than just another attack. At first look, this appears to be another deadly attack in a long-running conflict. But the real issue here is not just the loss of soldiers. The deeper issue is the return of suicide bombing as a tactic in Borno State. Suicide bombings usually do not happen when insurgent groups feel strong and free. They often happen when such groups are under pressure and can no longer fight openly. In this case, the military has been carrying out sustained clearance operations and claiming territorial and operational gains. Against that background, a suicide bombing suggests a shift in strategy, not a sudden resurgence of strength. It is a way for insurgents to send a message. That message is often meant to show that they can still strike, even when pushed back. This also highlights a familiar challenge in counterinsurgency. As pressure increases on armed groups, attacks may become fewer, but more desperate and symbolic. So the key issue here is not whether operations are ongoing, it is whether the changing tactics of insurgents are being fully anticipated and countered. This is what makes this incident important beyond the immediate casualties. The first group affected is the soldiers and their families. These are trained personnel operating in a dangerous environment, and incidents like this remind everyone of the risks they face daily. For their families, each report like this brings fear, uncertainty, and loss. Next is the military institution itself. When a suicide bomber is able to breach a convoy, it raises questions about convoy protection, movement planning, and threat anticipation, even if operations continue afterward. The local communities in Borno State are also affected. Suicide bombings increase fear because they are unpredictable and difficult to detect. This affects movement, trade, worship, and daily life, even for people far from the actual incident. There is also an impact on the government and political leadership. Every major security incident puts pressure on official claims of progress and forces explanations about what is working and what still needs improvement. Finally, the insurgent groups are part of this picture. By using suicide bombers, they seek psychological impact more than territorial control. The goal is often to create doubt, fear, and attention, rather than to hold ground. In this situation, power is not just about territory. It is also about perception, morale, and who controls the narrative of progress or setback. Beyond the official statements, there are important things that are not clearly addressed. One issue is how suicide bombers were able to get close enough to a military convoy in an active operation area. While the bravery of the troops is acknowledged, there is limited public explanation about how such a breach occurred. Another point that is not fully discussed is the intelligence picture before the attack. There is little information about whether there were warning signs, intercepted movements, or prior alerts that could have reduced the risk. There is also limited discussion about convoy movement risks, especially during return operations after clearance missions. These moments are often vulnerable, but they rarely receive detailed public explanation. In addition, while progress against insurgents is emphasized, there is less clarity on how tactics are being adjusted in response to suicide bombings returning as a threat. These gaps do not mean failure should be assumed, but they do show that some important questions remain unanswered. In security matters, unanswered questions can weaken public confidence even when operations continue. For many Nigerians, especially those living in the Northeast, this incident brings back old fears. Suicide bombings are different from other attacks. They are harder to predict, harder to stop, and they create fear beyond the immediate target. When people hear that suicide attacks are returning, they begin to worry about public places again. Markets, mosques, churches, roads, and checkpoints start to feel unsafe, even if they are far from the actual incident. There is also the issue of confidence. Ordinary Nigerians want to believe that progress against insurgents is real and lasting. When attacks like this happen, it creates doubt and raises questions about how close the country is to lasting security. For people in affected communities, daily life becomes more restricted. Movement reduces, businesses slow down, and social activities are limited because people are trying to stay safe. Beyond Borno, incidents like this affect the national mood. They remind Nigerians that insecurity in one region can quickly affect the whole country. This is why how these attacks are handled and explained matters, not just to the military, but to ordinary people trying to live normal lives. As this situation develops, there are a few key things Nigerians should pay attention to. First is how the military adjusts its operations. Do convoy movements change? Are there new measures to detect and stop suicide bombers before they get close? Second is intelligence and early warning. Future updates will show whether security agencies are improving information gathering to prevent similar attacks. Another thing to watch is the pattern of attacks. If suicide bombings continue, it could mean insurgents are doubling down on this tactic. If they reduce, it may suggest that countermeasures are working. There is also the issue of communication. Clear and timely updates from security agencies help build confidence and reduce rumors. Finally, Nigerians should watch for consistency. Progress is not measured by one statement or one operation, but by sustained reduction in attacks over time. These signals will tell us whether this incident is a temporary setback or part of a larger shift in the conflict. The killing of 5 soldiers in this suicide bombing is painful, and it should never be taken lightly. But beyond the loss, This incident tells us something important about the current stage of the conflict in the Northeast. Suicide bombings often appear when insurgent groups are under pressure, not when they are winning. At the same time, they expose gaps that still need attention, especially around movement, intelligence, and protection. This incident shows that progress and danger can exist at the same time. Operations may be advancing, but threats are also changing. What matters now is not just continuing the fight, but staying ahead of the tactics being used. So the key question Nigerians should keep asking is this: as insurgents change their methods, is our security response changing fast enough to stop the next attack? That question is where the real challenge lies.